move now to the final topical issue, which is in the name of Deputy Michael McNamara, and again it's the Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport on the position regarding Aer Lingus cabin crew based in Shannon.
Thank you very much, Lascan Corla. Ministers, you no doubt will be aware Aer Lingus management announced earlier this week its intention to close the cabin crew base at Shannon Airport from the end of March 2014. This follows the company's announcement in September that it would outsource cabin crew services on a new transatlantic service from January 2014. That announcement to take effect from January, unilaterally to take effect from January 2014, was, I believe, directly contrary to an agreement which the company Aer Lingus had reached with the pilots when negotiating an agreement to outsource the 757 service in the first place. In response to that unilateral action, impact members in Aer Lingus across the country agreed impact balloted its members, and they determined that they would go on strike. Now, I'm relieved at today's events whereby the LRC has invited both parties to talks, and I would hope that Aer Lingus, if they haven't already done so, will formally announce that they will be accepting that invitation. Now, the limitations of what the government can do with regard to Aer Lingus, which, as we all know, is not a state-owned company anymore, it's merely a minority shareholding, is, I think, very well rehearsed in this House. For example, when Aer Lingus pulled, disastrously it should be added, pulled the flights from Shannon to Heathrow, these arguments were debated at great length, and effectively we were told, or I wasn't because I wasn't here, but certainly you were told that, that the government couldn't use its shareholding to force Aer Lingus to take any particular action. However, the government's advice on that issue from the Attorney-General, like a lot of advices from the Attorney-General, wasn't published. During the last general election campaign, I campaigned for the Attorney-General's advices to be published, and I don't really see why the Attorney-General's advices can't be published on a wide range of issues. I understand that there are issues which have commercial sensitivity, but when it comes to issues of constitutional change, and today there was an announcement, or there's a decision at least made by Cabinet, I just don't know why Attorney-General's advices can't be published, but I don't wish to digress. In any event, what I am saying is that the government, as a significant shareholder in Aer Lingus, has an interest in maintaining the value of the company. And the value of the company is determined and is very reliant on loyalty and customer loyalty. Unlike companies with whom it competes, for example, in short-haul flights to Europe, or even companies with whom it competes for transatlantic flights, Aer Lingus is very reliant on customer loyalty. And it's very difficult to see how you can maintain that customer loyalty while at the same time disabusing the loyalty of long-term staff. Now, there's a notion out there that the fact that Aer Lingus is a company where people work and work for their entire lives is something that the new management don't particularly like, that it doesn't fit in with the new, it doesn't fit in with some of the practices in opposition with their competitors, where people work for a year or two as cabin crew and then burn out and have to move on to other jobs. But in Aer Lingus, that hasn't been the practice, and that's something that Aer Lingus customers value. And that's part of the reason that Aer Lingus was able to survive, both because of the loyalty of those who work for it, but the loyalty of its customer base. Now, we have been told by the Irish Aviation Authority that it is safe to have 4-person crews for transatlantic flights. But there's a big difference between what's safe and what is comfortable, or what provides a reasonable level of customer service. And Aer Lingus prides itself, it markets itself on providing that customer service. It does have competitors who marketed themselves up to very recently on not providing a customer service. But that model doesn't seem to be working, and they're now changing. So at this time, it seems bizarre to me that Aer Lingus are seeking to reduce customer service. I look forward to your reply, and I understand that I will have a couple of minutes to reply in turn. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Deputy McNamara for raising this issue. At the outset, I should make it clear that Aer Lingus is a publicly quoted company, and decisions regarding the company's employees and bases are a commercial matter for the company, its board and management. As Minister, I don't have a role in such decisions, and for that reason, what I can say here today is somewhat limited. The state does retain a 25% shareholding in Aer Lingus, but this does not involve us in day-to-day commercial operations of the company. However, the government is committed to the new independent Shannon Airport company being a success, and sustaining employment opportunities in the Midwest region. The closure of Aer Lingus to Shannon cabin crew base would be very regrettable, and the Government urges the parties to make every effort to reach an agreement so that the base can remain open. In July last July, Aer Lingus announced a significant expansion of its transatlantic routes and capacity for 2014. This included very positive developments for Shannon, as one element is that Aer Lingus's Shannon to Boston and Shannon to New York services will resume during the winter months of 2014. The company has ceased operation of these services for part of the winter season over recent years, and they had provided loss-making and they proved loss-making for the company when it operated on the larger A330 aircraft as opposed to narrow-body aircraft, which they will now use. The resumption of year-round services will, according to Shannon Airport, result in a 25% increase or 50,000 additional passengers on Aer Lingus transatlantic flights at Shannon in 2014. Along with other new Aer Lingus European routes out of Shannon, this was welcomed as an indication of the airline's continued commitment to the airport. In addition to increased services at Shannon, Aer Lingus also announced new year-round direct services to San Francisco and Toronto from Dublin in April 2014. These new services were welcomed by all concerned when it first announced last summer, in particular by the inbound tourist industry and many IT employers in the country with close links to the Silicon Valley area. Providing year-round direct service for Shannon to inbound tourists from the USA will provide a major boost to local tourist industry and in the wider West and Midwest regions. These new services have been made possible because Aer Lingus is leasing 3 smaller Boeing 757 aircraft from another Irish airline, Air Contractors Limited. It was originally announced that Air Contractors would supply the aircraft, but the crew would be Aer Lingus employees, and the company began the recruitment process for additional cabin crew for this purpose. Agreement for these new arrangements has been reached with the company's pilots and cabin crew represented by SIP2. However, on the 24th of October, it was announced that the company had failed to reach an agreement with the Impact cabin crew staff. As I understand it, the dispute focuses in particular on cabin crew levels on the smaller Boeing 757 aircraft. Aer Lingus is proposing to crew the aircraft with 4 cabin crew and has received regulatory and safety approval for doing so. Other issues such as the cabin manager grade and rostering have also been raised by Impact. It is reported that Aer Lingus believes that Impact's objections to the new arrangements would make the Shannon cabin crew base commercially unsustainable for the company, and that would have little choice but to close the Shannon base and request Air Contractors to provide cabin crew for the Shannon to US services. In response to this, on the 4th of November, it was announced that Impact cabin crew balloted overwhelmingly 91% in favour of industrial action. The ballot was of all Impact's cabin crew in the state. The company, however, has not yet been served with notice of industrial action. The Labour Relations Commission has had contacts with both sides, and it was announced earlier today that they had been invited to meet with the LRC this Friday in an attempt to find an agreement to this dispute. The Government strongly urges both sides to use the available industrial relations machinery of the state to reach an agreement on the matter as soon as possible, in the interest of the travelling public, the staff and the company. Industrial action in the company could be very disruptive for passengers in the run to Christmas and very damaging for the company itself. It would be very regrettable if the boost that the Shannon region is going to get from increased Aer Lingus services to the airport were to be marred by a reduction in the numbers employed at the airport due to an industrial relations dispute.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy has 2 minutes for a supplemental.
Yeah, thank you very much, Minister. I accepted at the very outset the commercial nature of the government's interest in Aer Lingus, but I suppose my question was whether these developments at Aer Lingus were in the commercial best interests of the company, particularly of a company in an increasingly competitive market, and thankfully a more competitive market even at Shannon now, where there's increased competition both in short-haul flights and transatlantic flights. But as a former flag carrier, still effectively the flag carrier, it still markets itself very much as the flag carrier. I mean, we still remember, look up, it's Aer Lingus. I mean, there are differences between the marketing strategies of airline companies in Europe, from former flag carriers to newer, more dynamic companies which engage in maybe sharper practice with their workforce. But I think the companies with which Aer Lingus competes, and the same bracket that it operates in, such as former flag carriers like British Airways, certainly have a higher staffing level on their long-haul flights than some of their competitors. And people pay for that. I mean, generally Aer Lingus flights, I think, are more expensive than some of their competitors. But people pay that more expensive amount of money, knowing that they're going to receive, or in the hope at least of receiving a better service. And thanks to the loyal worker base that Aer Lingus has in its bases throughout the country, in Shannon, Cork and Dublin, they receive that level of service which they accept. But I mean, it's hard for a company to expect to be able to provide that level of service and at the same time treat workers as the workers at the cabin crew base in Shannon have been treated. You mentioned the 30 cabin crew trainees who were taken on only 3 weeks ago to be trained for this transatlantic flight. Well, they've since been summarily fired. I mean, that's not a way to treat workers that you hope are going to man a new service and build a loyal customer base. But nevertheless, I am glad of the government's support, and I hopefully that won't be called into question when it comes to fixing the huge pension deficit. And all of this dispute operates against the pension deficit, both Dublin Airport Authority, which affects Shannon Airport employees, and of course all former Aer Lingus employees. So hopefully that can also be sorted out. I know it's an entirely separate dispute to this one, but nevertheless it is the backdrop, or it is a backdrop to this dispute. Thank you, Minister.
Thanks, Deputy. And Minister, just brief response.
I think it's really good news for the Shannon region and for Ireland that it's been possible to restore the winter transatlantic services and the services to San Francisco. Part of the reason why they failed before was because they weren't commercial. The aircraft are too big and the costs were too high. So if we want those services to work, they do need to be commercial. And Aer Lingus has to make decisions on what the appropriate staff cost should be. And bear in mind the difference between 5 staff and 4 staff is 25% in your costs. 6 staff over 4 staff is 50% in your costs. So it does make a difference. But certainly it is my preference that the base should remain open, that the staff should be normal Aer Lingus employees, and that those additional jobs should go to normal Aer Lingus employees, and that will be communicated to the government members of the Aer Lingus board. But the only way to achieve that really is for Impact and Aer Lingus to come to an agreement at the LRC, and it's my hope that they will be able to do that.